Sangye chudang soki chognam la jang cho bardu dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyengi pesonam ki rola penchu sangye drupa shu. Sangye chudang soki chognam la jang cho bardu dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyengi pesonam ki rola penchu sangye drupa shu. Sangye chudang soki chognam la jangchu bardu dagni kyab suchi dagi chenyen gi pesonam ki rola penchu sangye drupa sho.
Okay, good morning. So let's just do a couple of minutes meditation on the breath before we start. So now again, let's generate bodhicitta motivation for this morning's session. I think the purpose of my life is to lead all sentient beings from suffering to enlightenment. In order to do that, I must reach enlightenment myself. My reaching enlightenment depends upon my studying, understanding, thinking about, meditating on, realizing the entire path to enlightenment. From the root of the path, devotion to the spiritual friend, all the way up to the non-dual state of unification, full enlightenment itself. Therefore, I'm going to study Atisha's text, the first lamrim text, A Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, with reference to the commentaries by Khunu Lama Rinpoche, Holiness the Dalai Lama, and Geshe Sonam Rinchen. So think, what we're doing this morning is for us to become a Buddha in order to lead all sentient beings to Buddhahood. So, try to feel that bodhicitta in your heart based on great compassion, understanding the suffering of all sentient beings and ourselves. Okay, thank you. So last time we were looking at the qualities of the guru, the spiritual guide, looking at His Holiness's teachings in Illuminating the Path to Enlightenment. And we've come to the section on the qualities of the student. So take it personally. So His Holiness says, in his great exposition in the Lamrim Chemo, Lama Tsongkhapa goes on to discuss the three principal qualifications of an ideal student. One, an objective and open mind. Okay, so this is where the mirror of the Dharma comes in, So this is the teaching, use the teaching as a mirror. Do I have these qualities? We should ask ourselves. An objective and an open mind. The intelligence to judge between right and wrong, appropriate and inappropriate. Enthusiasm for and interest in the subject. Objectivity and openness are critical, regardless of what you want to study. Bias is an obstacle to knowledge. Objectivity ensures that you're engaging in the Dharma in the right way and with the right motivation. The sutras and Nagarjuna's Precious Garland both emphasize this and describe 4 wrong ways of approaching and engaging in the Dharma. So these are 4 wrong ways. Engaging in the Dharma out of attachment to a particular tradition or custom. Engaging in the Dharma out of hatred or hostility. Engaging in the Dharma to seek temporary relief from some actual or perceived threat. Engaging in the Dharma out of ignorance. With respect to the second point, that's hatred and hostility, sometimes people have so much aversion to something that they embrace whatever opposes it. For example, there are people in India who are motivated to engage in the Dharma in rebellion against their traditional caste status as untouchables. They embrace Buddhism because of negative feelings towards their traditionally inherited religion. I think that's quite a nuanced point. in the 50s, there's a Buddhist teacher in Maharashtra called I had his name 15 seconds ago. Anyway, he had this mission to convert all the so-called untouchables, who Gandhi called Harijan, the children of God, the sweepers, the cleaners, the sewage disposal people, all the people who did the menial tasks that the higher caste Hindus didn't want to do. I think they're called Dalit also. If you're a Buddhist in India, you go beyond the caste system. You're no longer a Hindu. You're a Buddhist, so the caste system doesn't apply to you. So he converted tens of thousands. Ambedkar is his name. Ambedkar. I think tens of thousands of people, and I don't know how many really became Buddhists, but they became Buddhists in name. And I don't know if it was out of hatred of their social status or just seeing a way out of it. But anyway, that's what the second point is. So then the second quality of the ideal student, intelligence, is also very important, since it's intelligence that allows you to discriminate between right and wrong and so forth. When commenting on this quality and the various attitudes that practitioners must have towards their teacher, Lama Tsongkhapa writes that students should relate to their teachers as loyal and respectful children. This does not mean that you should give your leash to anybody who's willing to take it, but only to one who possesses the right qualifications. So we talked a lot about that last time, the qualifications of the guru. To substantiate this point, he cites a Vinaya Sutra that says that if a teacher says something that contradicts the Dharma, you should not follow that teaching. Another passage states that if a teacher says something contradictory to the overall framework of the Buddhist path, the student must point this error out to the teacher. Now we take this in context of the tantric teaching that we should see our teacher as fully enlightened being, infallible, as omniscient, as never making a mistake. And if we see what we think is a mistake in the teacher's behavior, we're supposed to see that this is a skillful means. This is an intentional manifestation done in order to lead us or maybe some other students to on the path, on the correct path, but not see it as a flaw in the teacher, and therefore he can't be enlightened. Still, His Holiness says here that if we think the teacher says something that contradicts the Dharma, we don't have to follow it. And if it's a mistake in teaching, we should point that out to the teacher. I remember one time very early in the piece, one of the early Kopan courses, when I was assisting Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche. I think he said something in the discourse that I thought was wrong, that I thought was contradictory to what he'd said before on several other occasions, actually. And so when we went back to his room after the teaching, I think I got a little shrill, actually. and was saying, "You said this, how, you know," and I started berating him for making this mistake. And oh my God, and he kind of sat there and looked at me and listened. He said, "Well, it's possible to make a mistake," very humbly. So then I felt really terrible. You know? So I guess I should have then, at the time, turned around and said, "It's possible to make a mistake. I'm making a mistake right now, you know." But I don't think that's, I think I felt vindicated. Anyway, it was, you know, 40, 50 years later, I still remember it. So, you know, getting shrill and shouting at the teacher is not the way to point out what you think is a mistake. Anyway. Then His Holiness says, "This reminds me of a story." See, it reminded me of a story too. The Tibetan master and learned scholar Geshe Sherab Gyatso used to attend the discourses of one of his teachers, Mucho Rinpoche. Whenever Mucho Rinpoche made some effective point, Geshe Sherab would immediately praise it and say, "Yes, these are powerful instructions, deeply inspiring." However, if Mucho Rinpoche said something contradictory to the teachings of the Buddha, Geshe Sherab would immediately rebuff what his teacher had said, saying, "No, no, no, nobody should say such things." Well, that story is just hanging out there. I don't know. That's what His Holiness said.
So Nick?
I don't know what happened to that Geshe.
Nick?
Yeah.
So could we say, or just think to ourselves, well, the teacher's manifesting the appearance of a mistake, and then very politely request that they explain the apparent contradiction to us, if, you know, in private, perhaps.
Yeah, so just, you know, very, you know, I mean, the approach I hope I'd take now would be rather to say, well, oh, I heard you say this in teaching Rinpoche, and I guess I was mistaken because I always thought that, you know, and then see where it goes, you know. And also, I think it's probably better to do it in private afterwards, or if you have, or you can, you know, either grab the teacher in the corridor after the teaching, or ask if you could just see him briefly at some point, rather than do it publicly in the teaching, because you never know what you're asking for in terms of humiliation. So, but you know, if you want to practice the 8 worldly dharmas and smash your ego, then, you know, ask the question in public and get mashed. You know, Lama Yeshe always used to say that his job was to mash the student's ego, and so he was very skillful. You know, at first, you know, and when we think of Lama Yeshe, we think of this kind of joking, smiling, very sort of easygoing guy, you know, but once he'd reeled you in, and you know, there was pretty much no escape, then he'd start mashing, you know, and it could get quite uncomfortable, especially in public. There was a time also when, oh God, it was in the 80s, after Lama Yeshe passed away. It was in the late 80s, early 90s. I can't remember exactly when it changed, but when Rinpoche taught, he would clear his throat and cough a lot during the teaching. And it was, you know, if you focused on that rather than what he was saying in between the coughs, it could be quite distracting, you know. And must have been the mid-80s, I think. It was probably 85, something. I was still a monk. Probably 84, late 84, 85. the students at Tara Institute in Melbourne, Tara House, invited Rinpoche to give a teaching. You know, he was doing a tour of Australia, and they're expecting too many students to fit in the centre, Gompa, so they rented a high school gym or something like that nearby. And so the first teaching, there were probably 120. It was a 3-night teaching. And the first night, there were about 120 people there. So, you know, Rinpoche taught, sort of coughed his way through about 2 or 3 hours of teaching. And the second night, there were about 80 people there, you know, so a third of the people didn't come back. And again, the same thing, you know, 2 or 3 hours of teachings interspersed with a lot of coughing and clearing of throat and repeating what he just said. You know, conventionally speaking, it was probably a masterclass in how not to give a public address. But so the third night, there were only about 40 people there. And so again, you know, so they were kind of the hardcore, you know, people who'd been to Kopan and stuff, and people who were on the committee at the centre and things like that. So, so afterwards, when Rinpoche was staying at the centre, so I went back with him, and again, you know, my tone of my voice went up, almost shrill again, and I was like, Rinpoche, these students, they worked so hard to put this teaching together, and to, you know, go into all the expenses of renting this place and publicising and doing this and that, and then I don't know exactly what words I said, but it was something like, you know, so they bring all these students here with a lot of effort, and then, you know, all you do is cough your way through the teaching and drive people away. I didn't quite say it like that, but that was kind of the essence. And then he kind of sat back and looked at me really harshly, you know, and had this look on his face as if somehow, after all these years, he finally understood where I was coming from. He said, "Oh, do you think I don't know what I'm doing?" And I was like, inside, I was like, no, I can't say. I don't think you don't know what you're doing. So, you know, I shut up. I never made that kind of criticism again. So, you know, I really don't know what it was about. You know, Rinpoche has always been about quality rather than quantity. And so he never pulled any punches when he's teaching the lamrim. You know, you'll see these American Buddhist teachers and so on, they don't dare go near reincarnation or the hell realms or, you know, difficult topics. It's like did I do this quote last week or the week before, like an old man chewing food? You know, you just chew the soft bits and throw the hard bits away. So that's how not to teach, you know, don't just do the easy stuff and leave the hard parts aside. Of course, it depends who you're talking to, but you know, so at Kopan in the courses, there was always attrition. You know, the courses start off with 100, 200 people, whatever it was, and then there's always some would go away. And the greatest exodus was from the 6th course in spring of 74, when, you know, the numbers had been going up. When I went to the 3rd course, there were like 50, and then the 4th course, there were 120 people. 4th course, the 5th course, there were 200, and the 6th course, there were 250. And that was just too many for Kopan to handle anyway, logistically. So, and we'd had to rent these cheap Indian army tents that leaked, and it rained quite a bit. And Rinpoche spent over a week teaching the 8 worldly dharmas and suffering in the hell realms. And so, you know, about 70 people left. So that was, good as far as getting rid of the tourists goes, but it was quite disruptive to those of us who were doing the organizing. So after that, at the Copan courses, we decided to do what we called interviews. So these interviews weren't done for the interviewers to decide who could come and who couldn't come, but rather to explain in more detail what doing the course entailed. You had to come to all the sessions, and it started early in the morning and it finished reasonably late. And, there were long sessions, and there were 1.5 to 2 hour meditation periods, which could be hard on people who hadn't sat before. And also there were no chairs. Everybody had to sit on the ground. If there were old ladies there, occasionally they'd drag in a couple of folding chairs from somewhere, but generally everyone had to sit cross-legged. And so their knees hurt, their backs hurt, their hips hurt. And sometimes they'd like to skip sessions. At that 6th course, I'd recently been ordained along with 9 of my Dharma brothers and sisters. 10 of us had been ordained in Bodh Gaya in January 74. And there are a few other students who'd been ordained previously. So there are about 15 or 16 Western monks and nuns staying at Copan, starting what was the IMI, the International Mahayana Institute, the FPMT's organization of monks and nuns. And one of the jobs we were given was to, during the sessions, to patrol the grounds of Copan and find people skipping the sessions and send them back. So we were called the DP, the Dharma police, much reviled. And but we were very kind of fun. A lot of us, well, me anyway, were kind of fundamentalist and kind of a little holier than thou, and trying to be quite strict, rounding people up and sending them back into the torture chamber of meditation or Rinpoche's teachings. So after that, the 7th course was the first one with interviews. There are about 200 people still, despite the interview, they showed up, and that went pretty well. And then subsequently, it fluctuated a little, but I think even now there's around 200, 250 people go. Of course, there hasn't been a Copan course since 2019, I guess. Well, last year there wasn't, and I don't think there's going to be one this year. I can't imagine. I don't think they've ever tried that. I mean, I don't know if they could do it by Zoom. Maybe I don't know if there is that idea to try and do it that way. Anyway. Anyway, does that answer your question, Bob?
Yes.
Yeah. So as always, it mainly depends on how we think. With respect to the third quality of the student, enthusiasm for and interest in the teachings, right at the beginning of Lamrim Chemo, Great Exposition, when Lama Tsongkhapa states his intention for writing the text, we find a request for the intention of readers who have the quality of objectivity, are endowed with the faculty of intelligence, and wish to make their human existence meaningful. In order to make your life meaningful, you need enthusiasm for and interest in practicing the teachings. Otherwise, whatever you learn is like the drawing of a lamp. It's like the drawing of a lamp. It doesn't illuminate anything. And your knowledge remains at the level of mere information. We find similar exhortations among the Indian masters in the salutation verses of his commentary on Maitreya's Ornament of Clear Realization. Haribhadra states that his teacher, Vimuktisena, wrote a commentary on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Vasubandhu, Vimuktisena's own teacher, had also written a commentary on those sutras, but interspersed their ultimate meaning according to the but interpreted the meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras according to the Chittamatra philosophy. So, you know, there are these four schools of Buddhist philosophy, Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamaka. And Madhyamaka, there's the Svatantrika and the Prasangika. So the highest philosophical view in Buddhism is the second of the Madhyamaka schools, the Prasangika. So that was what Nagarjuna taught, and Chandrakirti and Shantideva, Lama Tsongkhapa, that's what the Lamas, Gelug Lamas, teach. But so Vasubandhu was the brother of Asanga, who was sort of the founder of the Chittamatra or Yogacarya school of Buddhist thought. Although some people say, although those were his teachings, he was actually himself a Madhyamaka. So I don't know. Vasubandhu was his younger brother. Vasubandhu wrote the famous commentary on the Abhidharma called the Abhidharma Kosha, which is one of the main texts that they study in the master's program in the FPMT, and one of the main texts the Geshis study to get their Geshe degree, the Abhidharma Kosha. So recognizing So Haribhadra wrote commentaries on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. His teacher was Vimuktisena, and Vimuktisena's teacher was Vasubandhu, who had also written a commentary on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras from the Chittamatran point of view. So the second highest school of Buddhist philosophy. So the first two schools are Hinayana schools, the Vaibhashika and Sautrantika, and the Chittamatra and the Madhyamaka are Mahayana schools. Recognizing that his teacher Vasubandhu hadn't fully understood the meaning of these sutras, Vimuktisena wrote his own commentary as a corrective. This showed that even students with great devotion and respect for their teacher should have the intelligence to point out any mistakes their teacher makes. So Bob, you know, if you disagree with something your teacher said, instead of speaking to the teacher, you could also write your own commentary. Another example concerns the Indian master Dharmakirti, whose teacher was a student of the 7th century pandit Dignaga. So who has a room with the 8 great Indian pandits?
Bob was at the center when.
Oh, that's in the library, in the front room there now. Oh, okay. Anyway, so we have pictures of those. Lama Yeshe, we had, when I was running the Tushita Center in New Delhi, Lama said we should have tankas of those 8 great Indian pandits, the 6 ornaments and the 2 crown jewels, so-called. So, so we had them painted, and then people made prints. I don't think the prints we have at the center from the tankas we had in India, but one of the Dutch students, photographer Jan-Paul Kool, took some photos of them, and I think we might have them, those photos somewhere. Anyway, so Dharmakirti was one of the 8, and Dignaga was one of the 8. So I don't know if I can name them, but there was Nagarjuna and a Sangha, Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Asanga, Vasubandhu, Dignaga, Dharmakirti. So they were the 6 ornaments, and the 2 crown jewels are the Vinaya scholars, Gunaprabha and Sakyaprabha. So those who are the 8 these great famous great Indian pandits. So another example concerns Indian master Dharmakirti, whose teacher was a student of the 7th century pandit Dignaga. Dharmakirti used Dignaga's text in his study of epistemology. As he read over the text with his teacher, Dharmakirti realized that even his own teacher hadn't fully understood Dignaga's meaning. So I'm not sure what the name of Dharmakirti's teacher is. When Dharmakirti mentioned this to his teacher, he invited him to write a commentary who would take his own interpretation as an object of critique. So I think that Dharmakirti's teacher invited Dharmakirti, instead of just verbally expressing his concerns, he should write a text. So I don't know if he did or not, I guess he did. All these examples show clearly that the great masters truly took to heart the Buddha's own advice, that his followers should not accept his words simply out of reverence, but should scrutinize them in a way a goldsmith examines gold, by rubbing, cutting, and scorching, and accept the validity of his teachings only on the basis of their own analysis. The Mahayana has a long tradition of subjecting the Buddha's words to detailed analysis and examination. Following that, with an interpretive approach to discriminate between teachings that can be taken at face value and those that require further interpretation. Just looking at the notes here. Right, so now it's just saying where we can find more information on that. This is necessary because there are certain scriptural teachings that, if taken literally, actually contradict reasoning and experience. These interpretations have been made by Mahayana practitioners and masters who have unwavering, single-pointed faith in the Buddha, some of whom have actually been willing to give up their lives in the service of the Dharma. Even such devoted masters subject the word of the Buddha to critical analysis. So I think it's saying that, you know, when yes, as when you think that the teacher has said something contrary to the teaching. So what teaching is it talking about? It's talking about the Buddha's teaching. So if you want to see if you've understood the Buddha's teaching correctly, that you think that the teacher may have made a mistake regarding, then when you go to the Buddha's teachings, we still have to remember that the Buddha's teachings aren't all to be taken literally. You know, there are definitive teachings and there are interpretive teachings. So there's this book, His Holiness's commentary on the Heart Sutra, you know, where it says, you know, no nose, no eye, no ear, no, so what we just said before. So there's a book published by Wisdom called The Essence of the Heart Sutra. Some of you might have that. So on pages 104 to 106, there's a more detailed discussion of divinative versus provisional interpretation. So So that's where His Holiness explains those two types of teaching in more detail. The essence of the Heart Sutra. So that's a little on the qualities of the student. Objectivity, intelligence, and enthusiasm. So then His Holiness explains how to establish proper reliance. So what we should do to how to properly rely on our teacher. In his great treatise, Lama Tsongkhapa goes on to describe the actual manner in which proper reliance on a spiritual teacher should be developed and established. Reliance on a spiritual teacher, he writes, is the foundation of the path, or as we always say, the root of the path, because the spiritual teacher is the source of all temporary and particularly ultimate gain. The point here is that if we encounter a genuine spiritual teacher, this person may be able to help us open our eye of awareness and lead us on the path. The actual practice of relying on a spiritual teacher is performed through both thought and action. But relying through thought is the key. This entails the cultivation of two principal qualities, faith and respect. So faith sometimes gets a bad rap, but there are two kinds of faith. There's blind faith, which is what we shouldn't have, and understanding faith, or faith based on correct understanding. So that's the faith it's referring to here. Faith and respect. In the lamrim, we often find citations from Vajrayana texts stating that we should perceive our teacher as a truly enlightened being. It's important to understand the significance of this practice. By encouraging you to cultivate a perception of your teacher as an enlightened being, the lamrim texts do not mean that such reliance on a spiritual teacher is indispensable. If you look at the structure of the lamrim teachings, although all the practices are organized within the framework of the three scopes, so we come to that in a minute, those are the initial middling scopes, the framework of the three scopes, those of the initial and middling scopes are regarded as common practices. The term common implying that they are not full or complete practices in and of themselves. So we've talked about that a number of times before. The initial scope teachings discuss the need to cultivate the yearning for a better rebirth and contain practices related to that aspiration. So this is the initial scope. This is the, again, as we've said many times, scope is not Lama Zopa Rinpoche's preferred term. He says it's not what the Tibetan says. He translates it literally as the path of the lower capable being. That's Rinpoche's English, the lower capable being. If you want to edit that a little bit, you could say the practitioner of least capability. So there are the three scopes would be the lower capable being, the practitioner of the least capability or capacity. The middle scope would be the path of the middle capable being, Rinpoche says, or the practitioner of intermediate capability or capacity. And the path of the great scope, the path of the great capable being, or the practitioner of greatest capability or capacity. But, you know, so although they talk about scope everywhere, you know, we should remember that slightly more elaborate translation of the being of this, that, or the other capability, the being or the practitioner. So the initial scope teachings discuss the need to cultivate the yearning for a better rebirth and contain practices related to that aspiration. The middling scope teachings deal with the practices of the three higher trainings of morality, meditation, and wisdom. But even here, they are not presented in full because they are still in the context of the Mahayana path. The point is that the lamrim texts are written assuming that the ultimate aim of the practitioner is to enter the Vajrayana path in order to reach enlightenment, the great scope. Therefore, even though the lamrim teachings present the idea of perceiving your teacher as a truly enlightened being, it does not mean that every single spiritual practice depends upon that kind of reliance. Cultivating the perception of your teacher as a fully enlightened being is relevant only in the context of Vajrayana, but not in the common practices. So when we get to Atisha's text, which we actually will in a minute, he talks about these, this is where the idea of these three levels or these three scopes is explained. The actual reliance on a spiritual teacher is done through the cultivation of certain thoughts, particularly faith, admiration, and respect, based on the recognition of your teacher's great kindness. It does not end there, however. In fact, the very purpose of cultivating such attitudes is to arouse enthusiasm for and dedication to your practice. By cultivating such thoughts as admiration and respect, you develop a deeper appreciation of what your spiritual teacher embodies, and your commitment and dedication to practice naturally increase. The best way of making an offering to your teacher is to practice what you've been taught. As Milarepa wrote, "I do not have any material things to offer my teacher, but still I have the best offering, my practice and experiences." Among the writings of the great masters, we find a verse stating that while there might be a question as to whether single-pointed meditation can lead you to liberation, there is no doubt that deep faith in, devotion to, and respect for your teacher will. This suggests that if, in the context of Vajrayana, you have deeply felt single-pointed faith in and respect for your spiritual teacher, you'll experience enormous enthusiasm and make great strides in your practice. The Indian Chakrasamvara master, Gandapa, or his name was Dilbupa in Tibetan, wrote that your spiritual teacher alone can lead you to liberation. However, commenting on this point, Lama Tsongkhapa said that the term alone here is not exclusive, but rather an emphasis placed upon the importance of relying on your spiritual teacher in context of the Vajrayana. So, you know, we see that also in the foundation of all good qualities, where it says, you know, this perfect human rebirth is received only once. So that's not a literal teaching, that's an interpretive teaching. Because if we understand the causes of perfect human rebirth, such as the one we have now, you know, the perfect rebirth has 8 freedoms and 10 richnesses. Each of those 18 attributes is the result of a cause. If we understand what we had to do to create the causes to receive this rebirth, this perfect human rebirth we have now, we must have had a previous perfect human rebirth in order to do those practices to bring about this one. And in order to receive that previous perfect human rebirth, we must have had many more before it, leading up to it. So that teaching is, this perfect human rebirth is received only once, is interpreted to mean actually it's not only once, but it's so rare, so hard to find, they're so few and far between, that it might as well be only once. Because if we blow it this time, it's going to be a long, long time before we find ourselves having this opportunity again. So, you know, it's good for us to think that this is so precious. This is the only time I'm going to have this, to give us the determination, the enthusiasm, not to waste a moment of this perfect human rebirth. But, you know, to make every moment of it meaningful by doing everything we do in each moment with bodhicitta, and thereby make every moment of our life a cause for enlightenment. So it says, your spiritual teacher alone can lead you to liberation. That is a similar sort of teaching. It's actually not literally alone, but that's the main, if we want to reach enlightenment quickly, the main quality we need within ourselves is devotion to our teacher. But again, who we choose as a teacher depends on our doing, what is it, due diligence in examining a potential teacher to see, do I really want to chain myself to this person forever or not? So we need to be careful. So it's an emphasis placed upon the importance of relying on your spiritual teacher in the context of the Vajrayana. Devotion to your teacher does not exclude the necessity of all the other practices, because devotion alone cannot lead to liberation. You need to understand the different contexts in which certain perspectives are relevant. If you have a broad understanding of the whole idea of reliance on a guru, it will help you deal with some of the problems and crises we see today in relation to this practice. So His Holiness gave this teaching more than 20 years ago. And the last 20 years have seen a lot of problems and crises in this area, I must say. Okay, so now I'm just going to, so we did the first verse of Atisha's Lamp for the Path, the root text. Where is it? Here it is. So just for auspiciousness, start at the beginning. Homage to the Bodhisattva, the youthful Manjushri. 1. I pay homage with great respect to the conquerors of 3 times, to their teachings, and to those who aspire to virtue. Urged by the good disciple Changchub I shall illuminate the lamp for the path to enlightenment. So we talked about that before. So now, second verse, understanding that there are 3 kinds of persons because of their small, middling, and supreme capacities, I shall write clearly distinguishing their individual characteristics. So, that's how Atisha begins the Lamp for the Path, by outlining these 3 kinds of practitioner. So the lower level is in verse 3. Know that those who by whatever means seek for themselves no more than the pleasures of cyclic existence are persons of the least capacity. So we'll look at the commentary, but that means, that being the practitioner of least capability. So this person, this being, is we'll come to it. The being of least capability looks at the suffering of the lower realms and trembles in fear and says, I definitely don't want to be reborn in the lower realms. I want to be born in the upper realms, the realms of relative happiness, where the 3 lower realms are the realms, the animal, hungry ghost, and hell realms. They're the realms of greatest suffering. So, of course, the upper realms, they're still within samsara, cyclic existence, so they're still pervaded by suffering, but relatively, they're the happy realms, the human realm, and the 2 kinds of God realm, suras and the asuras. So the practitioner of least capability is seeking rebirth in the happy realms, the pleasures of cyclic existence, such as they are. The next verse, 4, those who seek peace for themselves alone, turning away from worldly pleasures and avoiding destructive actions, are said to be of middling capacity. So seeking peace for themselves means individual liberation, nirvana. And as His Holiness said, that's mainly involves doing practice of the 3 high trainings: conduct, concentration, and wisdom. Five, those who, through their personal suffering, truly want to end completely all the suffering of others are persons of supreme capacity. So the implication there is, through our personal suffering, if we open our mind, as a good student, we are supposed to have an open mind. We can see that if we understand truly the depth and extent of our own suffering in cyclic existence since beginningless time, it's not much of a stretch to see that others are in the same situation, and not just a few others, but all others. All sentient, all samsaric sentient beings are in this same situation. And, if we have this mind of the greatest capacity, we see that how unsatisfying it would be just to free ourselves and leave all the others behind. So if we truly want to end completely all the suffering of others, are persons of supreme capacities. That's why we always start with this, the purpose of my life is to free all sentient beings from suffering and lead them to enlightenment. So that's the essence of this thought, of the practitioner of supreme capacity. So now, Khunu Lama Rinpoche's commentary. So he breezes through these first 5 verses. I'm not sure if I read the Khunu Lama's commentary to the first verse when we talked about it, but it doesn't hurt. So he says, the text opens with the title of the teaching in Sanskrit, which in Tibetan is Jangchub Lamgi Droma, Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. Jangchub is enlightenment, Lam is path, Droma is lamp. So this is followed by homage to Manjushri. Then the first verse includes 3 things. First, there's homage to the triple gem, the Buddhas of the 3 times, the oral teachings and realization of them, and the Sangha, those who have received the unshakable or noble path, the ultimate Sangha. Second, he mentions that his pure disciple, Jangchub requested him to give this teaching. So, the tradition is that nobody should teach Dharma without being asked. You can't, get on a soapbox in a corner and say, come here, listen to my teachings. I'll free you from suffering. One needs to be asked. So that's why he's giving his teaching, because he was asked. Also, it's one of the bodhisattva vows is not to refuse to give a teaching if it's a topic that you're capable of teaching, and if you're asked sincerely, then if you, so I don't have time, I want to watch TV or something, then that's breaking your bodhisattva vow. Third, he makes the promise or vow to write this teaching, this lamp for the path to enlightenment, the Lamdun. So I think these teachers who are qualified to write such profound texts have a deep realization of impermanence. And so this promise to compose the text is sort of done for auspiciousness, to try and ward off obstacles to completing writing the text. And I think also maybe it makes an imprint that if somehow they should die before they've had a chance to finish the text, they can come back and, write it again or do another one or finish it off or something in a subsequent lifetime. I'd never heard of an incarnate Lama coming back, not that I've heard much, but I've heard a bit over 50 years. Never heard of a Lama started a text in a previous life and came back and finished it in, the next one. Might have happened, but what I have heard is that there was one Lama who was very old, and he was meditating in a cave in the Himalayas, and the disciples, the people around him, begged him to start a monastery to educate the children of the area. And he said he was too old and he'd come back and do it in his next lifetime. And he did. So, the cognoscenti are nodding their heads. Anyway, that's Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So, he was, in previous life, he was the Laudo Lama up in the Himalayas, not that far from Mount Everest. In fact, so he was the Laudo Lama. He was meditating in a cave in his previous life. He passed away. He was reborn in that area, in a village nearby, recognized as the incarnation of that Lama. Went to Tibet, fled Tibet in 59, met Lama Yeshe in the refugee camp in West Bengal, in Buxa. met the Western student, Zina Rashevsky, began teaching Westerners, came to Nepal with Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and in '69, I think went up to Laudo, back up to Laudo for the first time since leaving in '56. And then within a year or two had built this monastery and started a school they called the Mount Everest Center for Tibetan Buddhist Studies, and which is now located at Kopan. But the monastery is still there at Laudo. If you're looking for an amazing place to do, a longish retreat, 3 months, if you want to do a Vajrasattva retreat, I did one there in '74. Wendy did it 3 months there in '98, and it's an amazing place to retreat. Not necessarily 3 months, a couple of weeks or a month, but it's definitely doing a retreat at Laudo should be on your bucket list. But in line with understanding impermanence, the bucket can be kicked at any time. So don't delay too much. Of course, I don't know these days if anybody is going to Laudo or not, but maybe next year. In the second verse, Atisha explains what he's going to write about. So this is Khunu Lama Rinpoche's commentary, right? So as I mentioned before, this was one of the 2 teachings we received from Khunu Lama Rinpoche in February of '75 in Bodhnath in Nepal. The other one was the Foundation of All Good Qualities. We've been through that. So now we're doing this one, the Lamp for the Path. In the second verse, Atisha explained, in the second verse, Atisha explains what he's going to write about: the graduated paths of the persons of small, medium, and higher capacity or capability. These are also the paths that Lama Tsongkhapa explains in his short, middle length, and great lamrim teachings, the graduated paths of the 3 types of practitioner. Of the 3 levels of follower, Atisha first explains the graduated path of those of small capability. Such people think, I don't care what suffering or happiness I experience in this life, I must avoid rebirth in the lower realms and attain an upper rebirth. With this in mind, practitioners of small capability abstain from negative actions and practice virtue. So, that's essentially the way to avoid rebirth in the lower realms. Abstain from negative actions and practice virtue. But of course, that's not enough, because we've been not abstaining from non-virtue negative actions. We haven't been abstaining from negative actions since beginning this time. So we have this huge collection of negative karma to be reborn in the lower realms in our mental continuum. So we have to do purification. So that was the point of the 3-month Vajrasattva retreat that Lama Yeshe gave us as a very early practice for the Western monks and nuns particularly. And so if you haven't been able to take off 3 months and do a Vajrasattva retreat, then there is a way of doing it at home over a longer period, even while still working, by doing practice in the morning and evening. Obviously, it's going to take a while. But, well, if you did 2 sessions a day, so in 3 months, doing 4 sessions a day, you can fairly easily do 100,000 recitations of the long mantra with the sadhana. So if you were doing it at home, 2 sessions a day, you could knock it off in 6 months if you were really diligent. You have to get up early and do a 2-hour session in the morning and do a 2-hour session at night. Anyway, Lama Yeshe explains how to do that in his book, Becoming Vajrasattva, the Tantric Path of Purification, published by Wisdom. So, anybody doing or wanting to do Vajrasattva practice will get a lot from that book. So it's important to purify previously created negative karma and to avoid rebirth in the lower realms, and also to abstain from negative actions and practice virtues. So the essence of that, as we always say, is keeping precepts. Taking the 5 lay vows, or then if we want to become professional Dharma practitioners, then we get ordained as a monk or nun and really put our life into it. And it's not just the pratimoksha vows, those 5 vows of monk or nun. There is also the bodhisattva vows, 64 of them, and then the tantric vows. So all these are ways of putting ourselves in what Lama Yeshe called the peaceful prison. So we, there's this idea that if you take a vow not to kill, not to steal, not to lie, not to engage in sexual misconduct, not to use intoxicants, so forth, that you're sort of limiting your life somehow. If you take even more precepts, you're limiting your freedom. We hear a lot about freedom these days. So actually it's the opposite. It's actually freeing you. Because if you're trying to practice Dharma and you haven't made a vow, and you're confronted with the opportunity to lie or to steal, you might be tempted to do it. But if you've taken a vow not to do it and you're mindful of your vows, of course, it's anyone remember that Seinfeld episode where Jerry and Elaine tried to rent a car? So they booked a car and they go to pick it up, and there isn't a car available. So there's this back and forth ensues with the agent at the rental car place. But he says, Jerry says, you know how to take the reservation, but you don't know how to keep the reservation. So the essence of the reservation is keeping the reservation. Anybody can take a reservation. The point of the reservation is to keep the reservation. So it's like that with precepts. Pretty easy to take precepts. You go to a ceremony, you blah, 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 you've taken the precepts. Keeping the precepts is another story. So, and the essence of precepts is not just taking them. Of course, if you don't take them, you can't keep them. But once you've taken them, the essence is to keep them purely, keep them for a long time. More the better. So, And so, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche always says, the essence of the practice of morality is keeping precepts, taking and keeping precepts. So we have this story before about Atisha and always carrying around the stupa, and whenever he noticed he'd broken a vow. So this was mainly in reference to the tantric vows, because he never broke his pratimoksha vows, his individual liberation vows, his monk's vows. He never broke them. He rarely broke his bodhisattva vows, but he said that he broke his tantric vows, like rain falling. So whenever he noticed he'd broken a tantric vow, he'd jump off his horse, put his stupa on a rock or in a high place, do 3 prostrations, and do the purification right away before the negative karma could fester in his mind. So that's also an important part of keeping precepts. If we fail, then we should recognize the break as soon as possible and purify it as soon as possible. So we have this little booklet, a little Vajrasattva booklet that Rinpoche made that could be carried around in a shirt pocket. So whenever you notice you've broken a vow, you can pull out your little Vajrasattva booklet and practice purification with 4 opponent powers. And the reason that keeping precepts is the essence of morality is because, one of the 4 karmic results of a negative karma, one of the 4 results of negative karma is a result similar to the cause in habit. So if we've, if we have a habit of stealing or lying, for example, then we have that habit from previous acts in this life and previous lives of stealing and lying. So we have this tendency, this is how karma works, one of the ways karma works is that the more you do something, the easier it is to do it again. It applies to positive as well as negative. So, and Rinpoche says the worst of the 4 karmic results, the result of being thrown into the lower realms, the result of experiencing, the result similar to the cause in experience where, you reap what you sow, what you did to others comes back to bite you, or the karmic result similar to the cause in habit, or the environmental result, you get born, look around the world. We're so fortunate, it's unbelievably fortunate where we are, not just in the country, but even in the state I think we live in, those of us who are in Massachusetts. Well, we'll see what happens in the next day or so, but just have to turn on the TV news to see how fortunate we are when we see what's going on in other places, not only in the world, but in this country. So, so the environmental result, so we're experiencing a pretty good environmental result at the moment. But anyway, of those 4 results, the worst result, Rinpoche says, is the one of perpetuating the negative habits, because that way we can never get out of suffering, because we're always constantly creating the cause of more and more suffering. We're creating more and more sets of 12 links that bind us more and more firmly to the, to samsara, to the wheel of life. So taking precepts is making a vow not to do an action is so important. And it's much more powerful than just abstaining from the action. Saying, well, I don't kill, so I don't really need to take a vow not to kill. The present life's killing is hardly the point. Of course, it's important, but to stop the karma from beginning this previous life's killing, that's kind of more important, really. So, Because once this life's over, we're at the mercy of all that. So that's the practitioner of small capability, abstain from negative actions and practice virtue. So the fourth verse, persons of medium capability develop aversion to not only the sufferings of the three lower realms, but also to those of the three upper realms. So all these sufferings we're seeing, that I was just talking about, for example, we see on TV, we should have as much aversion to that as we do to the suffering of the lower realms. To the whole of samsara, we should have aversion. That's called renunciation. Such practitioners abstain from negative actions in order to free themselves from samsara without much concern for other sentient beings. So that's the goal of the practitioner, the Hinayana, the lesser vehicle practitioner, to gain liberation for myself. I can't bear this suffering in samsara any longer. I have to escape. I have to get myself out of it. So that's kind of the goal. So that's the description of the persons of medium capability.
And Nick, I had a comment.
Pardon?
I have a comment about that,
Yeah.
that interpretation. So I'm just in defense of that aspiration. I think it's not only for self-concern, but also thinking that the task is impossible. I remember hearing this great Theravada teacher, Bhante Gunaratna, say, "Oh no, you can't ever free all sentient beings. There's way too many. Look at all the animals and insects. It's impossible." So it's not really, for him at least, and for some, it's not just only self-concern, but it's also not believing that the goal is reachable. And I don't want to discourage people from turning back to that goal, but just sort of defending that perspective.
But that's a mistaken perspective. With all due respect to Bhante Gunaratna, who wrote Mindfulness in Plain English and many other similar, really wonderful, important books. But it's every sentient being's mind has a clear light nature. Every sentient being has the potential to reach enlightenment. And of course, it's a daunting task. I mean, I feel daunted every day, but yes, he's right. I'm sure some people are daunted by that prospect, and so this path is for them. But ultimately, even if they attain liberation and nirvana, ultimately they will have to enter the Mahayana path and reach enlightenment, because even though they're not capable of getting their minds around the prospect at the moment, there will come a time because the work for self and the work for others isn't completed. And I've described a number of times how Lama Yeshe explained it, haven't I?
You can tell us again.
Well,
I'll hear it again.
So the practitioner of medium capability develop aversion, not only the sufferings of three lower realms, also the three upper realms, to the whole of samsara. So it's like through having this kind of deeper insight into the nature of samsara and the nature of suffering, they see all of samsara, whether you're reborn in the lower realms or in the upper realms, equally, it's all suffering. And in the end, it doesn't matter even if you are born in the upper realms, because, you're going to die, and there's no guarantee that when that life finishes, your next life in the upper realms finishes, that you won't be reborn in the lower realms. You know, if we're reborn in the upper, see how many people are reborn in the upper realms. You know, there are 7 or 8 billion people on Earth right now, and this is only one human realm out of infinite human realms throughout all of space. Look how much suffering there is. So, and how few people understand what human life is, how it comes about, what it's useful for. So, you know, those who do develop a strong renunciation to all of samsara, and that leads them to, you know, taking as many precepts as possible and practicing meditation with this strong determination to free themselves from cyclic existence and to practice these 3 higher trainings of, you know, pure morality, single point of concentration, and realization of emptiness. You know, so we see these depictions or statues of the arhats, you know, sitting very determinedly in meditation, just single-pointedly, very powerfully renouncing cyclic existence, wanting to attain freedom, wanting to be liberated from cyclic existence, and, you know, warding off all distractions, and ultimately reaching that goal, or when they reach that goal, there's this incredible rocket fuel of renunciation, determination, and single point concentration that has led them to smash their ego and you know, free themselves from beginningless negative karma and attain liberation. So, you know, when we reach the goal of single point of concentration, you see from the Shine chart, you know, these 9 stages of 9 levels of concentration. And when we reach the end of the road of single point of meditation practice, the drawing is that this monk flying freely in the air, which Lama Zopa Rinpoche calls rapturous ecstasy. So, you know, rapture is good, ecstasy is better. Rapturous ecstasy is like the tops. So, but, you know, if someone's hitting our head with a hammer, it's kind of pretty unpleasant. And when they stop, we feel this relief. Also, multiply that by several trillion billion times. If you think the suffering we've been experiencing since beginningless time, when that stops, the experience of liberation, nirvana, is far, far greater. The bliss is far greater than that of single point of concentration, far greater than rapturous ecstasy. So it's this incredible relief. I mean, you know, that's what I'm not speaking, you know, I don't even need to say I'm not speaking from experience, but I'm not. And, but, you know, this is how Lama Yeshe taught it, you know. And, but the power of their renunciation and their determination to reach this goal is really so strong. And the bliss, the relief at reaching it is so great that when their mind leaves their body, it remains in this state of concentration on the realization of emptiness, the bliss of liberation, for eons. You know, eons, that vast periods of time. just fully absorbed in that, oblivious to anything else, oblivious to other possibilities, oblivious to the suffering of other sentient beings, oblivious to what they left behind. It's just pure concentration on this, on emptiness. But eventually, after those many eons, the power of their motivation begins to wane. And their concentration lessens a little bit. So at that time, they're receptive to the communication of enlightened beings. So Lama used to gesture like somebody knocking on your door, saying, hey, wake up. Okay, now you've had an amazing, wonderful time the last few eons, but check it out. Other sentient beings you left behind are still wallowing in their suffering. While you've been, relaxing in nirvana, they've been being reborn over and over again in the lower realms, suffering. All your friends, your parents, your loved ones you left behind they've been suffering. And look, you're here, but there is the ultimate goal, enlightenment. You've got a long way to go. So at that point, then these arhats have to. Bhante Gunaratana would not agree with this at all, I'm sure. But this is the Mahayana view. This is the difference between the two schools, bodhicitta. So, others are still suffering. You have some responsibility for that. There is the actual goal. You're only here. So then they have to enter the Mahayana path. So ultimately, they will reach enlightenment. But it would have taken them much, much longer to reach enlightenment and get to the stage where they can benefit other sentient beings. So from the Mahayana point of view, that's a travesty. That's why they say, please bless me not to fall into the trap of individual liberation. Because if I do, sure, I'll be okay, but it will just take me so long before I can actually benefit other sentient beings. It's like, so like that. This analogy with the river, with the Y-shaped river. I must have talked about it 20 times. So if there's a river that's, formed, big, wide, rough, very dangerous river, that's formed by the junction of two tributaries. So if you want to get to the other side, you can cross the raging river with great difficulty, but, it'll take a certain amount of time, but you'll reach the other side. Or you can go further upstream and you cross the first tributary, which is relatively easy, and then you relax on the dry land for a while, and then, eventually you come to the other tributary, and then you have to cross that one, and then eventually you get to the other side. It takes much longer to do it that way, with, eons of relaxing in between the two tributaries, than crossing the more difficult single river. So so the Mahayana is, okay, bite the bullet, develop bodhicitta, cross the raging river here. The Hinayana way, the easier way, is you cross the first bridge, first tributary, you go from suffering to liberation. Then you stay in liberation for a while. Then the Buddha wakes you up. Then you realize, oh, now I have to enter the Mahayana path. Now I have to start trying to develop bodhicitta. All sentient beings have been my mother, remembering their kindness, yada, yada. So then eventually you get to the other side, you become enlightened. It takes much longer. So the point of the Mahayana is to reach enlightenment as quickly as possible, to be able to free sentient beings as quickly as possible. So, something like that, okay?
Is there evidence within the Pali Canon of two types of nirvana, with and without remainder, or is this something?
I don't know really what's in the Pali Canon.
It's the Mahayana. Oh,
Who's asking? I can't see. Who was that?
That was William.
Okay, he's going to get his Pali Canon. Okay, well, we'll have to take that under advisement. So then just to finish the fifth, where he's gone. Who then are the beings of higher capability? This is the fifth verse. They are those who, having understood their own suffering, take it as an example of the suffering that other beings are also experiencing, and generate the great wish of wanting to put an end to the suffering of all sentient beings. So, you know, that's what we're talking about. So, and that's the difference between the two schools. So, you know, this commentary on the Hinayana school isn't criticism. We have to go through that. There's no what can I say? We should never criticize any of the teachings of the Buddha, because they all serve their own purpose. And whether it's relevant to us at the moment or not is not the point. The point is that it has been in the past and it could be in the future. And if we disparage any aspect of the Buddha's teaching from beginning to end, then we're doing ourselves a great disservice. And it's sometimes called the great fault, which is, you know, one of the things that when in the teaching on the advantages of the lamrim, it explains that one of the advantages of the lamrim teaching is shows how all the teachings of the Buddha fit into one path, and that every part is an essential part of the path, and we shouldn't reject this part or that path. So, you know, I don't know if Bhante Gunaratna rejects the Mahayana teaching or not, but you know, we certainly shouldn't. Okay, I think I've bored you enough for one day. So
Hey, Nick, can I get a question in?
sure.
So Nick, I've been meaning to ask you this a long time, you know, so this can be an emotionally tough one, I think, for you too. The death of teachers.
Yeah.
The death of lamas. You know, it's something we went through with Geshe Jampa. You know, it was quite an experience. And I guess Geshe Solga, and I'm not thinking locally, I'm thinking of the big lamas, the ones that we've relied on for many, many decades. How are you going to handle that?
Well, most of my teachers have passed away, you know.
Thanks for taking.
Of course, Lama Yeshe. I mean, it's what happens. I mean, you can't, it's unrealistic to think that they're not going to pass away, or that I'm not going to pass away. But fortunately, at the moment, we have several other teachers who can continue teaching us kind of seamlessly, from His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Lama Zopa Rinpoche to many of the Geshes in our centers who hold the lineage. So I think it'd be different if if we had only one teacher and there was and that teacher passed away and there was no sort of replacement or alternative. That would be devastating. But even when the Buddha passed away and all his disciples were crying and lamenting and saying, "Oh, don't, no, what will, for us, what will we do when you die?" He said, "Well, let the Dharma be your light." So as long as we have the Dharma, we're still okay, and even if it's only in books, if we understand the difference between intellectual knowledge and experiential understanding, then I think we'd still be okay. So I don't think it's anything to be emotional about, Don. What do you think? Don?
Yeah, I was muted. I guess, I see some big ones coming, and I think it's going to be tough for some people. That's all.
I agree. I think when Lama Zopa Rinpoche passes away, I don't know when that will be, it will be, I think, quite difficult for the FPMT organization. I mean, when Lama Yeshe passed away, we had Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So there was this, honestly, for many of us, it was a fairly seamless transition. Because Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche were both equally our teachers. So there was a definite sense of change and a definite sense of loss, but it wasn't despair, And Rinpoche kept us and the organization together when there's no obvious successor. So that will be difficult, I think, for those who are left. When His Holiness passed away, it'll be even worse, I think, for the Tibetan people. And then there's going to be this huge battle. The Chinese are going to name some Dalai Lama.
The politics.
And this and that, so that's, I think that suffering is going to be great, really. And, the fact that we're able to be here like this and to have these centers and even have these opportunities as teachers, it's really all down to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So, that'll be a bigger blow. I think so far, the passing of His Holiness Trijang Rinpoche and Lingam Rinpoche and Sergong Rinpoche and Song Rinpoche and Geshe Rabden and Geshe Zopa and Khunu Lama Rinpoche, who was actually the first to go, and Geshe Zopa Rinpoche. I mean, there's so many of my teachers have passed away, but pardon?
Amchok Rinpoche, isn't he?
He passed away?
Maybe I got that one wrong. Sorry.
Kirti Senchab Rinpoche passed away.
Oh, he did.
Chodron Rinpoche passed away. So many of our teachers have passed away, but this has been going on since the time of the Buddha. So, and the Dharma has lived on, and what we really have to make sure is that it lives on in our mind and into our next life, so that when we pass away, that the imprints and our connections with those teachers who have passed away are strong enough that we'll meet them or similar teachers in future lifetimes continuously until we reach enlightenment. That's the important point.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. Okay, so we're past time. So thank you very much. We'll continue next week. And I hope. And Umze, take it out.
Saji perki jikshing metok tram re rapding jini degen padi sangye jingdu mingte urwagi drokun nam dagjing lacher pashog jeton lame kutse rapten ching nam katrin ne chok churgi padang lo sang ten pedren me sasungi drohe mun sel tag tu neg yurchig idam guru ratna mandalakam niryatayami. In that snow mountain encircled land, source of every benefit and joy, may Lord Tenzin Gyatso Chenrezig remain in life till samsara's end. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings who extensively clarifies the path that unifies emptiness and compassion. To the lotus in the hand, Lord Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech me all your holy wishes be fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjana's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Through this virtue, may I swiftly, having gained Guru Buddha's state, place each and every sentient being without exception in that state. Precious supreme Bodhi mind, may our unborn arise, and where born never decline, but increase forevermore. Ik meet se ter chen chen resik, dream ken pe wang po cham pel yang, gang chen ke pe su gen song kapa, lo sang dra pe, Jabla Solvade.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.